Hello, and welcome back to the Green Standard podcast powered by Veriheal, where we talk about all things cannabis. And today we are talking to Dr. Abraham Benavides. Now, Dr. Abe has been a crucial member of the Veriheal team for years. He not only reviews all of our content for medical accuracy, but he contributes his own writing and insights to the Doctor's Corner on our blog. More than that, he has been a critical player in how the medical community understands cannabis as a medicine and continues to pave the way for a more comprehensive education around the plant. Today, he shares his story of how he got to where he is now and the obstacles he faced along the way. I'm so excited for y'all to hear it, but before we dive in, if you are wondering if medical cannabis could be right for your specific condition, Veriheal can help link you with a physician in your area who can answer all of your questions and certify you for medical cannabis use in your state. To learn more and to book an appointment, visit veriheal.com. That's Veriheal.com. See you there, and let's get into it.
It's a big honor to be joining you guys.
Yes, and not only are you a Veriheal original, you've been with Veriheal for so long. It's so funny because we kind of knew each other in this past life. I don't know if I've ever told you the story of how I got into it, but the very first night I moved to Colorado, someone asked me hey, I write for this cannabis magazine. I'm leaving. You're a writer. Do you want to step in? And I'm like, sure. I had ended up writing for Nature and Bloom, which you are also a med reviewer for. And so we have worked in past capacities before Veriheal brought us together.
That's right. We go way back. So, and I mean, I was working at Nature and Bloom even before I was at Veriheal. So we're talking about 5 years ago.
Yes. So this conversation is a long time coming because I actually don't know how you got into the space. Everyone's experience with cannabis is different, and I'm excited to hear yours.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Everyone has a different story with cannabis, and everyone also has a different endocannabinoid system too. That's the diversity is part of the beauty of my work, and also the beauty of telling the stories. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing here. And so I just want to make a quick disclaimer before we go on that if I seem short of breath, it's because of my long COVID. So vocal cord dysfunction and breathing dysfunction is something that is still lingering with me, but the way I'm speaking to you now is way better than where I was last year, and definitely miles better than years ago. So maybe we should start all the way back.
And happy to see you killing the game now, despite the symptoms of long COVID. But why don't you introduce yourself and then back us up?
I'm Dr. Abe. I do canna coaching here at Veriheal. I also do canna coaching at the George Washington University at the Center for Integrative Medicine. That's where I see our most complex cannabis cases. I help people with all sorts of the common ailments and also uncommon ailments, help people break 40 plus years of insomnia. I've helped people wean off of benzos, opioids. I help people, find their mobility again or walking again if they're an elderly person and leave the walker or even the wheelchair behind. So I'm really fortunate to be in a position where I split my time mostly between research writing and clinical consult, or cannabis consulting. They both inform each other. The stuff that I'm reading and writing about is really helpful to my patients. And then when I see patients and I see what it's like in the real life for them, or what it's really like for caregivers, that informs my writing. If I'm writing about Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, I need to be addressing the caregiver and their concerns. Being a doctor with disabilities enables me to have kind of a greater compassion and understanding for where people are coming from, as well as being a victim of the war on drugs too. That's also in my past history. My story goes way back. My family is from Costa Rica, and I currently live in a small dusty town called Cartagena, Costa Rica, which is in the Pacific Northwest in the Blue Zone in the Nicoya Peninsula. My great-grandmother was actually one of the original 12 founders or settlers of this town. And she was a tropical remedy healer and a midwife. And so, she was a badass. She rode around on horseback even in old age, going around and helping with deliveries and, doing everything from healing to minor surgery, to, some light veterinary stuff because of the, oral traditions that she was handed down. And so she was illiterate. Actually, she never went to school. She had much more advanced knowledge than I ever will have of tropical remedies and things, just because of where this area is and the deep-rooted history. She was really the biggest inspiration for me in the first place to start studying the cannabis plant. So back in 1800s, and now living in the same town where she started before is really meaningful to me, and especially with the work doing, advocacy work in cannabis, since I was in medical school. So my family is originally from this area, and then they moved to Mexico for 20 years, and then they moved to the United States where I was born. So I'm the first generation American in my family, first doctor in my family too. I was born in Queens, New York, and then a week later, my parents put me in a shoebox and we moved out to Boston. We moved around New England a little bit because of my dad's job. And then I eventually did undergrad at Boston University, where I studied biology and business administration. Mm-hmm. And then I took a gap year to work in a dermatology office to, get some clinical experience before applying to medical school. When I was applying to med school, I was also interviewing with the Air Force and thinking about going that route. And actually, I just met with a recruiter and I was about to sign some papers. And then that's when GW came and made me an offer that I couldn't refuse. GW School of Medicine offered me a full ride scholarship to go to their school.
Can you imagine how different your life would be at this point?
Yeah. Yeah, you always think back in your career at these moments where things took a hard fork, and that was definitely one of them. It was a miracle I wasn't expecting, but I knew it was my calling, and I knew that I had to take it. Otherwise, my life today certainly wouldn't involve cannabis at all. Unfortunately,
understood. So before you move into this next, med school era of your life, I do kind of want to go back, and maybe you're going to get to this, so don't let me spoil, but you mentioned how your grandmother was kind of the inspiration for your journey into the cannabis industry. And so I kind of want to ask what that looks like before you go forward. Was that when you were really young and she was, acting as a healer? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
In our family, or in this area, family and traditions and stories are really well regarded. And so when I, heard about this story and I never got to meet this great person, I don't know if she ever used medical cannabis or used that hemp plant. However, I know that she wasn't afraid to use psychedelics, and that's something that's very common around here because psychedelics grow naturally year round in Costa Rica. So, I knew that she would use things like Reina de la Noche to help treat people's fever, for example, and that has a psychoactive side effect. So it actually gave my dad a bad trip when he was very young.
Yikes.
If he used a little too much. But I know that she used my great-grandfather's moonshine. So you would make, alcohol from, we use sugarcane here. It's called guaro. And so the guaro makes the alcohol. You can also get it from a special tree called coyol. You can make wine out of the tree that is also psychoactive, which is really interesting. And so vino de coyol is something that's also around here. Yeah, it's a very interesting reaction that also involves sunlight. So you drink the wine and you go in sunlight, specifically, it activates or metabolizes it more. That's something interesting that's around here.
Remind me to Google that later so I can read more.
And this was around the time that germ theory was still being, developed in Europe. So germ theory came out in 1865, really. And so this was, right around her time. And so she, obviously she had no idea what was happening in Europe, but she knew, at least handed down to her, that using antiseptic for deliveries was important, and that, the alcohol would help with the delivery and prevent the infection afterwards. Those kinds of stories really inspired me to think there is a lot more to naturopathic medicine than people care to think. So
yeah, I guess I'm trying to place your aha moment about cannabis. Have we yet to get there in the story?
I mean, I was first personally introduced to cannabis in college. And at first I was apprehensive, but my friends actually convinced me with evidence. And they told me how it is a natural thing. They gave me some research papers. That's when I was personally introduced. I learned that it wasn't something really scary or was going to destroy my brain. I was already on a half scholarship at BU. And so I get to
Okay,
medical
sweet.
school in DC in 2016. The year before, in 2015, the district had just legalized cannabis through Initiative 71. And that was actually led by co-chaired by Dr. Malik Burnett. During my first year of medical school, he was speaking at the first cannabis conference on Capitol Hill. I decided to take it out of my own time because I wasn't busy enough to go and hear these people speak about this, because the only thing we had learned about cannabis was, it's addictive. Maybe it gives you psychosis, all of bad things, only bad things. I was like, wait a minute, there must be something else to this, because a lot of people, and the evidence that I had just, seen, doesn't suggest that it's all a bad thing. I'm sure there are side effects. There's a lot of uses and they're being overlooked. And this is something that's now legal in this area. So I wanted to learn more. I was at Dr. Burnett's panel. He was telling us about how it's really important for a next generation of doctors to learn about this. I raised my hand and I asked a question. And I said, Dr. Burnett, what can we be doing at the medical school level to, try to advance this cause? And so he said, well, you could think about doing some grassroots advocacy, like in some kind of educational group. That's when I had my aha moment, because it's really important as doctors to understand substances and how they affect people's health. Whether or not you intend on using it yourself, it's something that your patients will use and will ask questions, and you better be ready. I found a mentor in Dr. Misha Kogan, who is still my mentor and now my colleague at the Center for Integrative Medicine. He's medical director there, and he was back then. He's been there for a while. Somebody told me if I was interested in cannabis, I should talk to this guy. That's when I went to meet Dr. Kogan, and I said, hey, I'm really interested in this topic, and I'd like to try to help educate my peers about it. He was like, well, okay, if you want to learn about it, these are the best resources to start learning. I went through them and I was like, oh my gosh, we have to tell people about this, because we're missing out on a lot of benefits and without really a lot of risk. Then I went to the dean's office and I asked, would it be possible for me to start my own interest group or my own extracurricular club dedicated to studying cannabis, just an educational group? I met with Lawrence Deaton, who was one of the deans back then. He was also head of the FDA's anti-tobacco division. He's the reason why you can't smoke inside bars and places, actually.
I mean,
and so, yes, he has a lot of feathers in his cap, but that's one of them that I feel is worth mentioning.
Yes.
Anyway,
yeah.
He was hated by the idea because, he's an older psychiatrist and he knew that this was something that helped people. And so he decided to give me the green light from the dean's office to do it. And then I went through the process of creating a constitution, writing it all out, spelling exactly what we're doing is all strictly educational. And my job would be to bring in expert speakers, come and teach us about it. I had Dr. Kogan as my mentor, and so he would be my official faculty sponsor. I tried to find other students at other medical schools to see if other people were really passionate about this, to see if there was already an existing model that I could just, adopt and borrow. But when I looked around, I saw there was absolutely nothing.
Right. And do you mind if I ask what year this was? Was this still 2015?
This was 2016, the year after the Initiative 71 passed, and then it was enacted at the start of 2016. Went to the first Cannabis Congress in the fall, and then that's when I started the Cannabis as Medicine Interest Group, which is the very first of its kind at a U.S. medical school. So I became the first medical student to stand up and say, wait a minute, there's something to we can't just ignore it. The science has advanced a lot and people just aren't paying attention. About half the other medical students thought that I was completely crazy, or high, or both.
Sure.
And the other half thought that, well, this is interesting. Like, I think that, maybe we could learn something about it. My first speaker, actually, I contacted Dr. Ryan Vandry, who I believe you guys have just interviewed.
Yes, did you hear me drop my pen in surprise? No way, I know him.
Yes, you do. I saw that he was on the podcast too, and I was like, I gotta give him a shout out. Took the kindness out of his heart to come to my medical school without me paying him speaking.
Yes, that's so beautiful. And I mean, it just goes to show Dr. Vandry heading up this like massive research study that's like is going to track like the long-term effects of cannabis use, which is kind of revolutionary in of itself. So just like how much things have changed since 2016 alone is flooring.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've been reading cannabis research now for 8 years, and seeing how much it has grown and changed is flooring. It's exponential, and if you want to keep up with it, you need to be working on the vanguard of the front lines, like I do, where I just eat, breathe, and sleep cannabis research.
Yes. Yeah. Previous conversation we've had on this podcast is like, how can doctors who went to medical school before you, and who didn't have access to this research, how can they stay on that cutting edge? How can they best serve their patients? So before we move on to kind of your next act, do you have any advice for these doctors in the field?
Really recommend all of our scientific articles on Veriheal that I've gone over and medically reviewed. So we've got all pages on conditions that you should check out. And then to stay up to date on the research itself is kind of tough because it's like drinking from a fire hose. So having a trusted, updating source that's constantly feeding you summaries of these things. There's a lot of people who do them, like Lex Pelger and people like that. Finding sources like that. I also have a website where I've done writing myself. It's probably best to follow people who are in the know about it to stay up to date because it's such a fast moving science.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that. I talked to Lex Pelger yesterday. He was on the show. And so love to hear that he's another great, reliable source. I mean, of course, I knew how brilliant he was, is. All of that information, it's coming so fast. It's still in the works. It can feel overwhelming. Like, where can I start if I was in that position?
If you're like a lay audience member, you're totally new to this. Really reader friendly blogs like the one we have here at Veriheal are really great. They're really simple, straightforward to read. We have lots of great categories based on lifestyle research and all these things that you are interested in that you can look up and have it presented to you in a really accessible way. I edit and review a lot of them, so I make sure that they're up to date and we're always going over them and refreshing them. And so you can trust the content that we're putting out here at Veriheal as something that is accessible and up to date and informational, and that's part of my job.
Sweet. I was not trying to get you to give us a little plug, but thank you for that. I mean, yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
For the healthcare professionals, for researchers, I really recommend Cannabis. Cannabis 360 it's like an encyclopedia of cannabis. So I'm also a medical editor there at Cannabis, and I work with Uwe Blushing, who is very well known and well respected in this space. He's a PhD science writer. He's already written 3 editions of his Cannabis Health Index, which covers cannabis for over 200 plus conditions. And so essentially, Cannabis is basically a digitized version of his book. The subscription platform, very high quality, and Uwe trusts me to go through our conditions pages and have me periodically update them. So I have, personally reviewed over 200 conditions on Cannabis alone, and using all of the up-to-date supportive evidence. Every article that you see there will also have my name and my signature on there and the time and date stamp that I updated it. Uwe is really great at the science writing part, at writing the minutia of like this receptor and this thing, and this binding and this cannabinoid and this endocannabinoid. Really good at putting that together. My job is to supplement it, refine it a little bit to make it a little bit more readable, and then add the clinical lens to it. What should providers be looking for in these conditions? What are like the nuances that you need to know, either as a provider or as a caregiver, or as an investigator, and also the basics of the diagnosis, stats about the disease, adding all that kind of like clinical background to the work.
I love that you said that though, because we have also had the conversation of like, since this is, cannabis has been used for its healing potential for millennia, but the science is still relatively new in the grand scheme of life. It's everywhere. There's a lot of myths out there. And so we always talk about the importance of using a trusted source. So knowing that cannabis exist is going to be helpful to a lot of people, I'm sure.
Definitely for the healthcare professionals and the biomedical investigators out there, because like I said, it is a subscription platform. But if you need that level of detail and you want to really know the ins and outs of how it's working, what we really know today, that's the source that I would recommend. Our blogs on Veriheal are very much geared towards the general audience to get a basic understanding of how these things work and how they apply to their lives. They're just kind of different audiences, and I have to know how to switch between audiences.
Absolutely. And that is something so true, because The researchers themselves are incredibly important, obviously. Equally important is the people who take that difficult information, that language that's written in science vernacular or whatever, and disseminate it to general accessibility. And so you kind of play both sides of that, which is interesting.
Yes, and also as a patient myself too.
Multifaceted. So I don't mean to put the cart in front of the horse here. We're at med school. How did we get to now?
In total, the speakers that we had were Dr. Vandry. We also had Dr. Malik Burnett. And then we also had Dr. Patricia Fry, all really, really known in this community. And then, of course, Dr. Kogan, too. And so with that, I was like, well, what else can I do? That's when I got an idea to publish a research project. So I had two colleagues helping me with the group. And then we decided that we would launch a survey project. Drafted a survey and then went through the whole IRB process. It was a very simple survey, but it was very effective. Sometimes less is more. And the main results we got was that more than half of the medical students were encountering patients who had a question about medical cannabis. Okay. And then at the same time, more than half of them responded that they had absolutely no idea how to counsel the patient on medical cannabis, and just openly admitted, I am not prepared. When I asked them how much preparation they have, between none, a little, some, or, all preparation, most people said that they had zero preparation. I thought that was pretty much my point, was that this is something that is happening, regardless of your attitude towards it, but that the next generation of doctors does really want to learn about it. Most of them did also respond that if I had access to more cannabis education, I would want that. Those things made, I think, a pretty impactful statement. With that, I kind of solidified my group in the published literature and put that out there. It's a study that's been cited now over 25 times in other papers since 2016.
Incredible.
People keep coming back to it and being like, oh yeah, back in 2016, Abe stood up and did that. He stuck out his neck for patients and everyone thought he was crazy. And then people realized that no, secretly people do want to learn about it.
Hopefully one day it will not be a secret. And I think we're getting there now, but coming from that standpoint, how did you then take what you learned and put it into actionable, what do we do about it?
So then here comes basically Act 2. The closing of Act 1 is that I graduate from medical school, I get married, all my dreams come true. And then I match into residency. And I think I'm going to sail off into the sunset and fulfill my role as a family doctor that I had intended to be, but with the side of cannabis knowledge. And so I thought that I would bring my cannabis knowledge to somewhere there that's really needed. And at the top of my list was Colorado. I applied to all programs in Colorado, thinking that they would jump at the opportunity of having someone who is Spanish speaking and knowledgeable about this new topic. And, Colorado doing this before DC, into Southern Colorado Family Residency Program. I just want to plug, if you guys want to read the story in more detail than even what I'm saying, I have a blog specifically written about my experience there. What happened was, like everybody else graduating medical school, I used cannabis and I thought that it was fine. I was moving from a legal area to a very legal area. I took a break. I thought it was perfectly fine. We took a pre-employment urine drug screen and it showed up positive for THC. I'm driving halfway across the country from DC to Colorado, spending all of my money that I possibly have, loans basically, to try to get there. And then halfway in my journey in Kansas City, you get a call from the medical review officer at the lab saying, your test is positive for THC. Do you have a prescription? What's the deal? My first thought is that I need to be honest about this, because in this profession, in this job, integrity and, credibility and honesty are and should be paramount. Right away, I told them, no, I don't have a prescription. I am coming from a legal area to a legal area. If this is something that they want me not to do, let's just schedule a retest. They said, well, we'll talk to your employer and they'll deal with it. Yeah. I'm willing to play by the rules. If that's against your policy, I'm happy to do it. I read through their policy, and their policy simply states that any positive results go to HR. That's it. There was no immediate termination. There was no clause for this is what will happen. This is the protocol. Having a gray workplace policy can really get your organization in trouble if you don't know how to handle things the same and make the same rules for the same people. Then I started freaking out. I contacted my contacts at the residency program and I said, has this happened to any of you guys before? Have any of you tested positive for THC and what happened? They told me, of course, it happens all the time. That is not something to worry about because the current residents told me that they always get retested. Go back, get a retest at a certain time later, go through maybe computer training, sign a piece of paper that says they're sorry, but they move on. They continue working as a doctor. I thought that I would be afforded the same opportunity as my colleagues who were all white. I was the only Spanish-speaking resident coming into the management of the hospital system I was supposed to work for, contacted me, asked me about it. I told them, again, the truth. I'm happy to play by the rules. There's no problem. You can drug test me all 3 years of residency if you want. That's fine. I just really need this job. I need to work here. We have spent all of our money moving to the desert of southern Colorado with the promise that I would have this job. And so they told me, sure, come on down. Like, we'll figure it out when you get here.
Like, I've done that drive and it's horrible. And so to get all the way to Kansas City from DC and then be like, I feel for you in that moment.
Yes.
But, sorry, go ahead.
Exactly what you mean. So we drive all the way down there, sign the lease on the apartment, move in, and then they tell me, don't show up for work on Monday. And I was like, but you said that I would be fine. You know, they held off for a little bit, and then my residency program contacted me and said, yeah, you can't start. There's a positive test. And I was like, yeah, but how about I just go get a retest? I thought that's what was going to happen. And they said, well, we won't know until they tell us. And so I just decided, screw it. And I went out and I got my own test. Went to the same lab facility and I got my retest. I wanted to show that, yeah, I had been abstaining and I was confident the retest would be negative, and it was. I felt really relieved. And I was like, well, look, I can prove to you that this isn't an issue for me and that it is still before my start date, just like everyone else. They said that it was unacceptable because it was outside of their policy.
Bro, what's your policy? Outside of your policy.
Exactly. There is nothing inside your policy. That leaves it at a very vague discretion to, you know, these people who are in an ivory tower in Denver, far away. You know, I may have even been a rural provider or an ICU provider who was speaking Spanish and teaching about cannabis. That was my dream. But, you know, it was stolen from me, and it was stolen by people who didn't even bother to get to know me. I requested a meeting. Can I go up to Denver for an interview? Is there any way I can prove that this is, you know, not a problem for me? They refused to talk to me face to face. They refused to talk to me. And when I was on the phone with them, I was like, well, I don't understand, because all of my colleagues, all of my co-residents who are all white, telling me that they've all been retested and that there are people on that graduation stage that I saw walk across the stage who, like, at least 3 or 4 of them had positive THC tests during their residency program. Yeah. So I know that this isn't a fireable offense. I don't know why you are making different rules for me. The only difference between me and them that I can see then at this point with the exact same test results is the color of my skin and where I'm from. As soon as I hinted that this was racist, they shut down. That's when they cut off all communication with me. They said, well, let's put a pin in this conversation, hung up the phone without me get another word in, and never answered my call again. We were abandoned in the desert of southern Colorado by really the admins at Centura. It is a special ring of hell to call your family and explain to them why you don't have this great job that you worked so hard for your entire life. Worse, that it was over some racist baloney. And all I was asking for was an equal application of the rules. I wasn't mad that other people had privilege, but I should have been afforded the same privilege. I went to Colorado Physician Health Program. I turned myself in and I said, look, I got fired for cannabis before the job started. Has this ever happened before? They were so sure of my case that was anomalous because they told me that, no, this has never happened before, at least as far as we know, ever. We don't know why you would be fired for that on a pre-employment test, because we have surgeons who are practicing alcoholics and they're out there. We're just supervising them from here and we think that they're fine. And we know that we need doctors like you. At the end of the day, they immediately signed off on me and they said, you have no problem with cannabis or recreational substances of any kind. You should be out there practicing right now. So they wrote me this letter. I kept getting ignored. So CPHB set me up with one of their attorneys. Their attorney, Eric Steiner, who is actually, I believe he's still down the street from the Veriheal offices in Denver. He's on the same street, actually. Yes, which was so ironic. This was way before I knew that I would ever be with you guys. So sweet. I went to the lawyer and he told me that the best thing for me to do was to voluntarily submit 3 months of random drug testing. This was to really prove to the next program and to anybody else that I was good to go, that there's no problem with me. I'll do it voluntarily if you really think that'll help my case. And it did. It was expensive, and it was also very hurtful, because guess where I had to go do the drug testing? At the hospital that I was supposed to be working at. What I did wasn't any worse than what my coworkers upstairs were doing.
Right. And that is the crux of this, is that first of all, it was inherently racist. And second of all, there's this, the stigma is tied to the racist atmosphere, but this shouldn't even be a thing at all.
No, absolutely. Especially in a place where it's not illegal. Talking to my attorney during this, he told me you have to make the decision of whether you want to fight them. It's going to take at least 3 years to take them to court, and you're going to have to go through all of that financial and emotional expense. Eric was really nice. He wasn't charging me. Even I had no ability to pay him, and he knew that, but he still really helped me. So shout out to Eric. Thank you.
Shout out, Eric.
I'll probably send an email after this. I couldn't afford justice. And that's the reality of racism in America. You cannot afford justice sometimes, or all the time, pretty much. It's for sale. It was a really hard decision. During that time, I decided that I would reapply to residency, and that I would, still become a family doctor somewhere else. I eventually settled on Swedish family medicine. It's one of the top programs in the country for family medicine. It's easily a top 20 program. Again, I thought my dreams were going to be realized, and I thought that everything was going to be okay. And this time with Seattle, it wouldn't be cannabis related, but it would be also still another residency horror story. During that year when I'm reapplying, I asked my attorney, what do I need to do to still look like an attractive candidate but make money? I was like, well, the only thing that I can do is write about medical cannabis, because that's the expertise I had in med school, and that's my understanding. I'm overqualified to do a lot of jobs for less than a year, and I'm underqualified to do anything medical in Colorado. So I'm in this weird place where I can't really work somewhere because no one's going to take me for less than a year. That's when I decided I would work online and start finding editing jobs. Joined Upwork, and I started my freelancing, 5 years ago. And that's when I started with Daily CBD up in Vancouver. I met Ahmed from Nature and Bloom on Upwork, and he brought me on to be medical editor as well. Kept freelancing even as I went into residency. I was also working a couple of other jobs on top of my residency, as if I wasn't busy enough. But in my free time, I was doing more cannabis work. November, December of 2020 is when my life changed forever. So at the end of November is when I met, the team at Veriheal. And that's when I was fortunate enough to be brought on.
Despite the dream of being a family doctor not coming into fruition the way you imagined it, how many other people are laying in bed? They've tried medical cannabis. They think it might work. They Google cannabis for sciatica, and they come across, the conditions page that you medically reviewed. And so you're still acting as a healer and as an educator and as a crucial piece of honestly living history in this long march towards cannabis legalization, and furthermore, understanding cannabis, not just legalization, but on a cultural level.
I think you said it best. And I really appreciate you saying that.
Yes.
I have no notes. That was perfectly said.
Incredible. Well, on that note, this will conclude part 1 of the Dr. Abe guest appearance on the Green Standard. Abe, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be your colleague for a long time, and hopefully many years to come.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Dr. Abe. And as you guys just learned, Abe has been a pillar of truth and integrity for my entire tenure in the cannabis industry. But more than that, he's really performed significant work within his own communities to combat the stigma against the plant and its users. And I'm so glad we could finally sit down and have a longer conversation about it. Make sure you check out his Cannabis Across Life series, linked down below on the Veriheal blog, and stay tuned for part 2 of Abe's story in the next season of our show later this year. One last thing before I let you go. If you're wondering if you qualify for for a medical marijuana card. Or if you have questions about how medical cannabis could benefit your specific symptoms, Veriheal can link you with a physician in your area who can not only answer all of your questions, but can certify you for that medical cannabis card in your state. To book an appointment, visit veriheal.com. That's Veriheal.com. We'll see you there. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye.